Hi! We're gonna be talking about a few alien shooters. In case you didn't realize it yet, alien shooters isn't a game genre. It doesn't exist, I made it up for this video. What these games really are platformers. Platformers with guns. You see, there were no consoles allowed in our house growing up. PCs were allowed though, so while other kids were playing Super Mario, I was playing games like Duke Nukem, Biomenace, and Abuse. Let's discuss, compare, and dive in, starting with Duke Nukem. Not that one. No, not that one either. Still no. Ah, now we're talking. Duke Nukem was created by Apogee Software in 1991. In this game, you are a self-proclaimed hero hired by the CIA to save the world from the evil Dr. Proton and his army of tech bots. The game has 3 episodes. In the first one, Duke is dropped on top of a skyscraper in a city besieged by Dr. Proton. He confronts Dr. Proton inside his secret underground hideout, but the Doctor manages to escape to the moon. In the second episode, Duke manages to use one of Dr. Proton's quote-unquote time transport machines to teleport him to the Doctor's lunar fortress. After Duke foils the Doctor's plans once more, Dr. Proton flees back to Earth. A future Earth. In the third episode, Duke follows the Doctor into the future and puts an end to his plans once and for all. As I started playing the first level of the first episode of Duke Nukem, I very faintly remember the part where he drops on top of the skyscraper at the beginning of the level, but as for the rest of it,
I have no memory of this place.
I really didn't remember much, just flashes of gameplay here and there. I guess I was expecting to remember more, but that's probably what a 30-year gap between playthroughs can do to you. At least I can look at all these games from a fresh perspective. Now, I'm not actually playing Duke Nukem here. What I'm actually playing is Duke Nukem. See the difference? Duke Nukem is an old clone of version 2.0 of the game, which was named as such due to a potential licensing dispute. Apogee later managed to grab the correct licenses and move back to the original name. It's a classic platform with responsive controls, crisp EGA graphics, and a badass protagonist.
Hail to the king, baby!
All the basics are covered. Let's talk about those in general. In games like Super Mario, the game primarily scrolls in one direction, and trying to go back the way you came isn't possible. Some degree of vertical scrolling is usually possible though. In other platformers like Bubble Bobble, you're entirely confined to one screen only, and so the screen doesn't have to scroll anywhere. Duke Nukem and the other games here are multi-directional scrolling games, giving the illusion that there's a camera following you around and scrolling the level wherever you decide to go. Generally in all of these games, the goal is the same: reach the exit. In Duke Nukem, there's often a generator you have to destroy before you can reach it. In Biomenace, you'll have to rescue a hostage before the game allows you to exit. Abuse is the most permissive. If you can see the exit, you can use it. If you can make it there in one piece. As far as controls go, in Duke Nukem you move with the arrow keys, control to jump and alt to shoot. Biomenace has the same controls, plus a separate button for throwing grenades. Abuse has keyboard movement with mouse aim, which was a rarity at the time and made the gameplay much more dynamic. You can customize the controls freely in the first two games, but with Abuse you'll have to go and edit the configuration file. The games also have an element of secret hunting. For Duke Nukem, it's a big part of the game's replay value, which I'll come back to later. In Biomenace, some levels have a hidden gem that transports you to a bonus level between regular levels. That usually contains goodies like point pickups and extra lives. There's also a cool secret room with a couple of divs and a bunch of Duke Nukem items. In Abuse, you'll want to shoot at walls to reveal hidden rooms, which usually contain extra ammo to make your life much easier. Exploring side paths can also net you some goodies. So with the commonalities out of the way, let's move on to some specifics in level design. For Duke Nukem, you're usually hunting down keys or circuit boards that can open doors to progress further. There are 3 special items to pick up in each episode. The boots that allow you to jump higher, the grappling hook that allows you to traverse certain paths and reach higher areas, and the cyber glove, which lets you raise special bridges. Like I said previously, there's usually a reactor you need to destroy in order to power down hazards that would otherwise prevent you from completing the level. As a side note, jumping into the reactor beam is one of the few instant deaths you can trigger in Duke Nukem. I found that out the hard way. Each episode is roughly an hour long, give or take 15 minutes, so you can pretty much breeze through all 3 episodes in an evening. In Biomenace the keys are replaced with shards, but the idea is the same. As mentioned before, you're also required to rescue a hostage each level before the protagonist agrees to exit. But other than that, you don't get any special items that let you interact more with the levels themselves. There are, however, many more elevator-type platforms present than in Duke Nukem. The levels in Biomenace are larger and feel longer than in the other games due to the need for tedious backtracking. The special thing about Biomenace levels is that you can collect keys, which let you open up various types of lockers that can contain anything from score pickups to shards to extra lives. Adding up my footage, it took me around 4 hours and 35 minutes to complete Biomenace. But that's excluding retries, so it might take a bit longer realistically. Abuse is a much more streamlined experience. There are a few puzzles here and there, but aside from one head-scratching sequence, they're mostly on the lighter side. The main feature of each level is the numerous enemy ambushes between you and the exit. Sometimes you will know where the exit is, but you'll have to make a choice between trying to reach it ASAP or trying to fight off the horde more methodically for a greater chance at survival. There are also plenty of trap rooms, full of dangers like turrets, tunneling robots, shock plates, mines, and giant spiked spheres. Abuse also features a few power-ups that upgrade your armor. Speed, which lets you zip around at incredible speeds. Flight, which makes gravity a non-issue. And health, which doubles your maximum health. Abuse took me around 3 hours in total to complete, excluding retries. You can find Duke Nukem pretty freely available if you want to check it out. It should be identical to the official retail version, which you can find on the Zoom platform for a few dollars. I've never actually used Zoom, so I can't comment on how that works though. The game itself is a nostalgic classic, which remains a simple, solid platformer to this day. Duke Nukem doesn't outstay its welcome. Go give it a try. The next game is quite similar in nature, which is understandable since it's by the same studio. Biomenace was another game created by Apogee Software in 1993. Wait, hold on. What? 1993? That's the same year Duke Nukem 2 came out. Was Apogee Entertainment already large enough to have multiple development teams working on different games at the same time by that point? I guess that Apogee's shareware model was a bigger hit than I ever really thought. Well, that was until I read that the game was largely made by one man, Jim Norwood. I guess maintaining one-man studios is a much cheaper solution. In Biomenace, you take on the role of a pretentious ass, another CIA employee, Snake Logan.
Call me Snake.
Similarly to Duke Nukem, the story is told over 3 episodes. In the first episode, you must save Metro City from a sudden invasion of monsters created by Dr. Mangle. After gunning him down and wrecking his lab, you arrive in Alaska in the second episode on a mission to destroy the rest of the labs. Inside another lab, you encounter the Enforcer,
a cybernetic organism
guarding the lab. Snake survives the encounter and takes a chip out of the Enforcer's head, which leads him to the mastermind behind the monster invasion, Master Kane. After defeating Kane in the third episode and destroying the final lab, the world is safe again. For now. Biomenace is another platformer shooter largely in the same vein as Duke Nukem, while being an upgrade in most areas. Not as far as the actual platforming goes though. The jump implementation is weirdly jerky and somehow imprecise on takeoff and landing, and makes any sort of precision endeavor supremely frustrating. Still, when compared to Duke Nukem, it has more weapons, more levels, more bosses, and more enemies. Speaking of enemies and bosses, let's go through those. Abuse has the most meager enemy selection available. You basically have the main enemies, sometimes called howlers, a few flying enemies, security robots, and turrets. The howlers come in various colors and are armed with some of the same guns that the player is. The flyers come in 2 variants, rare and annoying. The brown flyers are relatively rare and never really a threat, whereas the smaller grey ones come armed with different weapons and need to be taken out quickly. Security robots are pretty durable and are armed with grenade launchers, but they don't really aim and are a brief speed bump at best. Turrets also come in various colors, signaling the weapons they're armed with. Red for rockets, green for grenades, and so on. Some turrets don't discriminate between friend and foe, so they're sometimes useful to keep around. The main enemies in Abuse technically aren't aliens, but rather infected humans, but they sure look like aliens, so I say it counts. Duke Nukem has a fair selection of enemies represented by Dr. Proton's TechBot army. And I'll bet you're gonna say, well, wait a sec, Neutral. You were supposed to talk about alien shooters. Robots aren't aliens! To which I reply, what is this thing then? Doesn't look terrestrial to me. How about this thing then? A robot on fire? Did they invent fireproof circuits? Well, anyway, aside from those, you've got small robots, big robots, flying robots, wheeled robots, hot robots, and rabbit robots. Oh, and you've also got giant helicopters for some reason that are super annoying to try and fight without taking damage. Biomenace has easily the most varied enemies out of the three, so I'm not going to try and list all of them. The first episode introduces you to the first selection of monsters, some of which are deceptively cute, right up to the point where they try to eat your face off. Some enemies can only be encountered in a few levels, like gunner mutants in episode 1, giant ants in episode 2, and armed cyborgs in episode 3. Now that I think about it, Biomenace's enemies aren't aliens either, but rather some form of lab-grown biomutants, hence the game's title. They were obviously inspired by aliens though, so close enough. There are 6 unique bosses in the game: Skullman, Dr. Mangle, the Queen, the Enforcer, Trash Boss, and Master Kane himself. Some of them are really difficult, and I had to resort to YouTube guides for tips. Let's go a bit further into what difficult looks like. Duke Nukem doesn't have a separate difficulty selection at all. As such, most of the game's replay value comes from hunting down various secrets, like destroying all the cameras on a level, which are apparently detailed in the manual for the full retail version. You have quite a generous health bar, and healing items are plentiful, so I rarely had to redo any levels. The final boss of each episode is Dr. Proton, and he behaves the same way each time, albeit the boss rooms change. He only takes a few hits to take down, and isn't all that tough. I'd say Duke Nukem is on the easier side of games. It feels almost cozy to play. Weirdly, Abuse wants to start you off at the easiest possible difficulty level, out of 4. I chose Normal difficulty, which happened to be the second hardest difficulty right after Extreme. It's not that bad, honestly. Although you can die really quickly, the save terminals are relatively close to each other, so reaching the point where you died is equally quick. Health pickups are also pretty common. The only sections that I had any real trouble with was one weird puzzle where I had to consult YouTube for a solution, and the very final Horde encounter. The final level features an unnamed boss duo, which I promptly dubbed Double Trouble. They're a pushover, really. I wouldn't call the game easy under any circumstances, but I couldn't call it particularly brutal either. Biomenace is probably the hardest one here. It lets you choose between 3 difficulty levels that affect your max health, how much ammo you start with, and how durable the enemies are. For example, on normal difficulty your max health is set to 4. Health pickups are much more sparse. You know what makes your health relatively meaningless though? Instant death mechanics. If you collide with specific traps or enemies, you will die regardless of your health and lose a life. The clunky jump implementation makes this problem much worse. I hate these types of mechanics, especially since the levels in Biomenace are larger and feel longer due to the need for backtracking. I was so fed up with the amount of retries that I started using cheats for the last few levels of episode 3. I have some good news. Biomenace is completely free to download and play on GOG. It's definitely worth checking out, even though the last few levels in episode 3 might start to feel a bit aggravating to complete. There's also something called Biomenace Remastered, which apparently includes a whole new episode and a ton of other improvements, coming out later this year. This next game is a verb, which the devs joked that you are inflicting upon yourself by playing the game. The initial version of Abuse was made by Crack.com in 1995. You are Nick Renna in the futuristic faraway year of 2009, wrongfully imprisoned in a high-security underground prison. Illegal genetic experimentation also takes place at the site. During the chaos and confusion of a prison riot, a highly infectious pathogen called Abuse breaks loose and affects convicts and guards alike. Abuse grotesquely transforms all of its hosts into berserk mutants. As Nick is the only immune person there, he dons a suit of battle armor and embarks on a desperate run for the control room to stop the spread of abuse from reaching the outside world. You can fit all of Abuse's story into one screen, and aside from the initial tutorial and the game end screen, that's all the text you're getting for the rest of the game. Literally, I'm not kidding. There's no dialogue or any messages to read. Even the weapons aren't named in-game. Mostly it's just you, running through eerily silent dark corridors and industrial hallways, until everything is suddenly interrupted by frantic gunfire, accompanied by the inhuman screams of a bunch of biological horrors suddenly appearing right next to you. Abuse was a very different game initially, because it was incomplete. The story was only a few paragraphs, and Nick was now fighting an alien race called Ants. Apparently, the game only had an 8-bit color depth, although it's hard to find anything concrete to confirm that bit of trivia. It does look a fair bit different in this older version, but that might be because I'm using a faulty DOSBox configuration. The shareware version I played as a kid was also interlaced. So, yeah, as you might have guessed, I'm not playing the original version of Abuse. I'm playing something called Abuse 1996, made by this guy, Metin Celik. Among its many improvements, it removes the FPS lock, meaning you can play the game at frame rates much higher than the original 24. I wasn't gonna record this whole video at 60 FPS just for Abuse, but believe me when I say that it is smooth.
Perfect. Everything, down to the last minute details.
Almost as smooth as this segue into talking about weapons. Duke Nukem seems to have brought only one weapon along for the ride, his trusty atomic pistol, which is very clearly a rifle as he's holding it in both hands, but whatever. Duke Nukem! You don't discover any new weapons during the game, but you can find pistol power-ups over the course of the current episode, which increases the number of shots you can fire in quick succession. Snake Logan,
call me Snake,
is a bit better equipped. His trusty rifle never runs out of bullets, but can only slowly fire one bullet at a time unless he's got ammo, of which you have 3 different types. You've got regular rapid fire ammo, explosive ammo, which does 5 times the damage, and plasma ammo, which is single fire but does massive damage per shot. Aside from the plasma ammo, interestingly, the rest of the ammo types are hit scan. They draw an invisible line between you and the enemy, and unless there's something in the way, you hit instantly. This wasn't all that common back in the day, as I recall. You also have grenades, which come in 3 types: regular, incendiary, and mine. Combining all those together, let's say Biomenace has a total of 6 different weapons, even though they're all a variation of either rifle, or grenade. Nick, on the other hand, is not messing around. His initial weapon is a laser rifle, which works similarly to Snake's assault rifle in that it fires fast when you have ammo and slowly when you don't. Now, normally in most games there's a sort of moderate progression in firepower as you get new weapons. You know, let's say you go from pistol to shotgun to submachine gun to rifle and so on. In Abuse, your very next gun in the game is a grenade launcher. And considering the hordes of enemies you're expected to mow through, it comes in handy. Soon after that, you get the guided missile launcher, which is really useful against flying enemies. The fourth weapon is some kind of sci-fi doomsday gun, which blasts a wave of fire at the enemies that absolutely incinerates anything it hits. But unfortunately, you don't find much ammo for it. I gotta say, I'm really liking the power scaling of Abuse so far. The fifth weapon is a rapid-fire plasma rifle, which does great damage against single targets, but struggles against hordes. The sixth gun is a short-range energy cutter that can very handily mulch an entire horde as they run at you. I'm calling the seventh and final gun simply the alien gun, which is a combination of the grenade launcher with the damage of the energy cutter. All of the guns feel balanced, with their own advantages and trade-offs. Finally, I want to talk about tone for a sec. Duke Nukem is on one extreme here. The game has a lot of humor, and with the silly story intro, Dr. Proton complaining between levels, and the time travel shenanigans, the game clearly doesn't take itself too seriously. There's no blood or gore in the game, and the game is rendered in bright EGA colors. For a much younger me, this was easily the most approachable game out of the three. Biomenace falls into a strange space between the two games. On one hand, the game has bright EGA graphics and has some jokes here and there, but on the other hand, the story features thousands of people getting eaten by mutant monsters, there are dead bodies lying around in levels, and enemies are blown to gory bits as they die. Abuse is the other extreme. The color palette is much more muted, and light and shadow play a much greater role. I'll be honest, this game intimidated me as a kid. I don't remember the shareware version having any music either, so all you could hear was the growls and grunts when howlers were near. Howlers emit their signature blood-curdling scream when they charge at you, and they made me flinch a few times. There's some amount of blood and gore present, but the game doesn't focus on it too much. There's no humor present, and the intro sets a tense atmosphere. A few years after release, Abuse was made open source by its creators. I highly recommend you go and try out Metin's version of the game. There's a link for that in the video description. There's also something called the Abuse 2025 project, which I haven't tried, but I'll leave a link for that one too. If you're looking for a good horizontal alien shooter, this is the one. Platformers like these were my kind of jam as a kid, giving you some of that classic Super Mario style gameplay feel, while also giving you a way to defend yourself right from the start. Do you have a favorite alien shooter? Which one? Let me know in the comments. In the next video, we're gonna be talking about eating dots. Until then, have a nice Duke Nukem.